Love bombing never begins with cruelty. It begins with warmth so intense it feels like destiny. It feels like being chosen, seen, and finally understood. Words arrive perfectly timed, attention feels endless, promises sound sincere, and for a moment you believe you have stepped into something rare. But what feels like love at first glance is often a carefully accelerated illusion. Real love takes time to reveal itself. Love bombing demands immediate surrender. It rushes your emotions forward while quietly asking you to silence your instincts. This is how the sweetest trap is set, not through fear, but through excess. Too much affection, too much closeness, too much certainty, too soon. You are lifted high before you have learned where you stand. And when the pace feels overwhelming, you tell yourself it is passion, not pressure. You excuse the intensity because it feels good to be wanted so deeply. But intensity without stability is not romance, it is imbalance. And imbalance always carries a cost. This speech is not about blaming the heart that believed. It is about awakening the mind that sensed something was wrong but stayed silent. It is about understanding how emotional overload can quietly replace emotional safety. Because when love is real, it does not demand you disappear into it. It does not rush you, confuse you, or test your worth. True love gives you room to breathe, and once you learn that difference, the trap loses its power forever. When affection arrives too fast to be real, the illusion of instant connection. There is a particular moment in the beginning of certain relationships when everything feels accelerated, almost unreal. Affection pours in with extraordinary speed. Words of admiration arrive before familiarity has had time to form. You are praised, prioritized, and placed at the center of someone's emotional universe almost overnight. At first, it feels flattering. It feels like recognition. It feels like fate moving quickly to correct years of waiting. But genuine connection does not arrive like a storm. It arrives like a season, gradual, patient, and grounded. When affection rushes ahead of understanding, it is not depth, it is urgency wearing the mask of romance. Love that is real does not need to prove itself immediately. It allows space for discovery, silence, and uncertainty. But when affection arrives too fast, it often leaves no room for your natural rhythm. You are swept into a pace you did not choose, responding instead of reflecting. Compliments become constant. Communication becomes relentless. The message is subtle but powerful. This connection must move forward now. In such moments, the heart feels special, but the nervous system feels alert. And instinct, if listened to carefully, often whispers that something is off. The danger lies in how easily speed can be mistaken for sincerity. When someone appears intensely focused on you, it can feel like safety. When they speak as if they know you deeply, it can feel validating. Yet knowing someone takes time, time to observe how they respond to disappointment, boundaries, and disagreement. Rapid affection skips these truths. It builds a story before the facts are known. What you experience is not intimacy forming, but attachment being fast-tracked. Affection that moves too quickly often carries an unspoken expectation, emotional availability without emotional consent. You are invited to open yourself fully before trust has been earned. You are encouraged to believe before you have verified. And because it feels good to be seen and wanted, you silence the part of yourself that asks questions. This is how emotional momentum replaces emotional clarity. Once momentum takes over, slowing down feels like loss rather than wisdom. Another quiet sign is how urgency disguises itself as certainty. Statements about destiny, permanence, or exclusivity appear early, not as possibilities, but as conclusions. There is little curiosity about who you truly are because the image has already been decided. You are not being discovered, you are being projected onto. And projections, no matter how flattering, are fragile. They collapse the moment reality demands patience. Healthy affection invites you to participate, not surrender. It respects hesitation. It welcomes pacing. It does not flood your emotional space to secure a position within it. When affection overwhelms rather than reassures, it creates dependency before stability. You begin to feel responsible for maintaining the emotional high. And without realizing it, you adjust yourself, your time, your boundaries, your voice to keep the connection alive. This is where confusion begins. You wonder why something that felt so good now feels heavy, why warmth is mixed with pressure, why slowing down feels unsafe. The truth is simple but uncomfortable. When affection arrives too fast, it is often not about connection, but about control through closeness. Not control through force, but through emotional saturation. When everything is intense, there is no room to step back and see clearly. It is important to understand this without judgment. Many people who experience this are not foolish or desperate. They are open-hearted. They value connection. They respond to sincerity. And that openness is not a weakness. It only becomes vulnerable when it is rushed past discernment. Awareness does not harden the heart. It protects it. Real love does not feel like being pulled forward. It feels like being walked beside. It does not overwhelm your world. It fits into it. It grows stronger through consistency, not intensity. When affection is genuine, it remains steady even when excitement settles. When it is not, it requires constant escalation to survive. Learning to pause when affection accelerates is an act of self-respect. It is choosing observation over reaction. It is understanding that what is meant for you will not disappear when you slow down. And once you internalize this truth, urgency loses its power. You no longer confuse speed with depth. You no longer mistake emotional fireworks for emotional safety. You recognize that the strongest connections are not the loudest at the beginning, but the ones that endure quietly over time. Intensity is not intimacy. Understanding the difference between emotional fire and emotional safety. Intensity has a way of convincing the heart that something extraordinary is happening. It feels powerful, consuming, and alive. Conversations stretch late into the night. Emotions are expressed with urgency. Every interaction feels charged, meaningful, unforgettable. And because intensity creates sensation, it is often mistaken for intimacy. But intimacy is not measured by how strongly something is felt. It is measured by how safely something is built. One excites the nervous system, the other calms it. Confusing the two can quietly lead a person away from themselves. Emotional intensity focuses on feeling more, faster. It pulls you into closeness without preparing the foundation to hold it. Intimacy, on the other hand, grows through understanding, patience, and mutual respect. It is revealed in consistency, not in emotional peaks. You do not feel rushed to reveal everything at once. You are not compelled to perform vulnerability to keep the connection alive. Intimacy allows you to arrive as you are, gradually, without pressure. When intensity dominates a connection, it often demands immediacy. Feelings must be shared now. Decisions must be made now. Doubts must be silenced now. This urgency can feel romantic, but it leaves little space for reflection. You begin responding emotionally instead of thinking clearly. The bond forms quickly, but it is formed on stimulation rather than understanding, and stimulation, by its nature, is temporary. It needs escalation to survive. True intimacy does not fear time. It welcomes pauses. It allows moments of silence without panic. It does not collapse when communication slows or when life intrudes. Intensity, however, interprets space as threat. When emotional fire is the glue holding the connection together, any distance feels dangerous. This is how anxiety quietly replaces peace, even in the presence of affection. Another critical difference lies in how each responds to boundaries. Intimacy respects them. It sees boundaries as clarity, not rejection. Intensity often reacts to boundaries with disappointment, confusion, or emotional withdrawal. Not openly, but subtly, through shifts in tone, attention, or warmth. You begin to sense that maintaining intensity requires sacrificing comfort, and slowly, without realizing it, you start abandoning your limits to preserve the connection. Intimacy is built through shared reality. It observes how two people handle disagreement, disappointment, and difference. Intensity bypasses these tests. It creates a bubble where everything feels perfect because nothing challenging has been allowed inside. But reality eventually arrives, and when it does, intensity struggles because it was never designed to hold complexity. Intimacy thrives there. One of the most misleading aspects of intensity is how it feels personal. You believe the connection is deep because it feels deep, but feelings can be created without knowledge. Someone can stimulate emotion without truly seeing you. Intimacy requires being known, not just desired. It involves witnessing imperfections without idealizing or abandoning. It grows when admiration is balanced with acceptance. Over time, intensity without intimacy becomes exhausting. The emotional highs begin to demand equal lows. You may notice that peace feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. You start equating calm with boredom and chaos with connection. This is not love deepening. It is the nervous system adapting to constant stimulation. And once this pattern forms, it becomes difficult to recognize what healthy closeness actually feels like. Intimacy does not overwhelm. It anchors. It does not consume your identity. It supports it. You do not lose your voice to keep it alive. You do not feel smaller to remain connected. Instead, you feel steadier, more yourself, more grounded in who you are, not who you need to be to maintain affection. Learning the difference between intensity and intimacy is an act of emotional maturity. It requires unlearning the belief that love must be dramatic to be meaningful. It invites you to choose steadiness over excitement, depth over speed, and clarity over confusion. When you begin valuing emotional safety more than emotional fireworks, you stop mistaking pressure for passion. And in that shift, something powerful happens. You no longer chase intensity. You recognize it, appreciate it, and let it pass if it lacks substance. You become patient with connection. You allow love to reveal itself slowly, honestly, without performance. Because real intimacy does not rush to convince you. It waits, confident that what is genuine does not need urgency to survive. From being cherished to being required, how adoration quietly turns into expectation. In the beginning, the attention feels effortless. You are admired, praised, and made to feel significant in someone's world. Your presence is welcomed, your words are valued, and your time feels respected. Nothing is demanded, nothing is questioned. It feels like appreciation without conditions, but beneath this warmth, something subtle begins to shift. What started as admiration slowly gathers weight. The affection that once felt freely given begins to carry unspoken rules, and because the change is gradual, it is rarely noticed until the emotional balance has already changed. The transition from adoration to expectation does not arrive as conflict. It arrives as disappointment, a slight change in tone when you need space, a quiet withdrawal when you do not respond quickly enough, a sense that something is wrong, even when nothing has been said. These moments teach you silently what is required to keep the connection smooth. You begin adjusting, not because you are asked to, but because you sense the cost of not doing so. At this stage, affection becomes conditional without ever being declared that way. Appreciation turns into obligation. You feel grateful for the early warmth, and that gratitude slowly transforms into responsibility. You start thinking about how your actions affect the other person's mood more than how they affect your own well-being. This is how emotional labor begins, quietly, invisibly, and without mutual agreement. What makes this shift so confusing is that nothing outwardly harmful appears to be happening. There are no harsh words, no open demands, just expectations disguised as emotional need. You are expected to be available, understanding, and accommodating. When you meet these expectations, warmth returns. When you do not, distance appears. Over time, you learn the pattern, and you begin managing yourself to avoid emotional disruption. Healthy love does not require constant self-monitoring. It allows both people to exist as individuals without emotional penalty. But when adoration turns into expectation, individuality begins to feel risky. You hesitate before expressing disagreement. You soften your boundaries. You delay your needs, not because you are controlled, but because you are conditioned. You want to preserve the connection that once felt so affirming. This is the moment when the relationship stops being about shared growth and starts being about maintenance. You are no longer simply present. You are performing attentiveness, performing gratitude, performing emotional availability. and performance over time creates exhaustion. The warmth that once energized you now drains you because it must be earned repeatedly. Another sign of this shift is how appreciation becomes selective. You are praised when you align and overlooked when you assert yourself. The message is subtle but consistent. Affection flows when expectations are met. Slowly, you begin to associate love with compliance, and because the original adoration was so powerful, you chase it, believing that if you just try a little harder, things will return to how they were. But what has changed is not you, it is the dynamic. Adoration is easy when there are no boundaries. Expectation appears when boundaries emerge. This is where emotional imbalance forms. One person adjusts more. One person carries more responsibility for emotional stability, and imbalance, no matter how quietly it forms, always reshapes the relationship. It is important to recognize that this pattern often develops without conscious intent. It is not always driven by cruelty, but by emotional dependence. When someone relies on admiration to feel secure, they may unconsciously turn affection into expectation. Understanding this does not excuse the behavior, but it explains why it feels so confusing and personal to the one experiencing it. The cost of living under expectation is gradual self-erasure. You lose touch with what you want because you are too busy managing what is required. You stop asking whether the relationship is healthy and start asking whether you are doing enough. This is the most dangerous shift of all, not because of what the other person demands, but because of what you stop demanding for yourself. True love does not change when you assert yourself. It does not withdraw when you need space. It does not make you feel responsible for another person's emotional balance. When affection is real, it remains steady even when you say no. It does not punish independence. It respects it. Recognizing the shift from adoration to expectation is not about rejecting love. It is about reclaiming self-respect. It is about noticing when appreciation becomes pressure and choosing not to confuse the two. When you step out of performance and back into authenticity, something becomes clear. Love that requires you to shrink was never meant to help you grow. Why love bombing finds the kind and the hopeful when emotional generosity becomes an open door. Love bombing does not search for carelessness. It searches for openness. It is drawn to people who listen deeply, feel sincerely, and believe in the goodness of connection. Kind and hopeful individuals often carry a quiet strength, the ability to empathize, to understand, to give without keeping score. And it is precisely this emotional generosity that makes them vulnerable to accelerated affection, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lead with heart before suspicion. Empathy creates a powerful emotional signal. It tells others, "You are safe here." For healthy relationships, this is a gift, but in unhealthy dynamics, it becomes an entry point. Love bombing attaches itself to this warmth, amplifying it with attention and praise. The goal is not simply closeness, but emotional anchoring. When someone mirrors your values, affirms your struggles, and reflects your dreams back to you, it feels like recognition. But recognition can be genuine, or it can be strategic. Kind people often assume sincerity until proven otherwise. They give others the benefit of the doubt. They explain away discomfort rather than confront it. When affection arrives intensely, they interpret it as enthusiasm rather than pressure. When boundaries feel challenged, they question themselves rather than the dynamic. This is not weakness, it is compassion without armor, and compassion without boundaries becomes costly. Hopeful individuals believe in potential. They see what could be, not just what is. They are willing to invest emotionally early because they trust growth and connection. Love bombing feeds on this hope by presenting a fully formed future too quickly. Promises arrive before consistency. Certainty appears before evidence. And because hope wants to believe, it leans in instead of stepping back. Another reason kindness is targeted is because it is patient. Kind people endure confusion longer. They tolerate emotional inconsistency while searching for understanding. When affection fluctuates, they try harder. When intensity fades, they assume it is temporary. This patience, when met with imbalance, becomes self-sacrifice. And self-sacrifice, when unreciprocated, becomes emotional depletion. There is also a deep sense of responsibility that often accompanies empathy. Kind individuals feel accountable for emotional harmony. If someone withdraws or becomes distant, they assume they have done something wrong. Love bombing exploits this by tying emotional warmth to responsiveness. When you respond as expected, affection flows. When you do not, something feels off. Over time, kindness begins adjusting itself to maintain peace. Importantly, love bombing does not initially feel threatening to the kind-hearted. It feels affirming. It feels like being valued for who you are. That is why recognizing it is so difficult. The very traits that make someone loving, openness, trust, generosity, are the same traits that delay suspicion. And by the time confusion sets in, emotional attachment has already formed. This is where self-blame often begins. When the dynamic changes, kind individuals search inward. They ask what they did wrong. They replay conversations. They attempt to restore the early warmth by giving more. But the problem was never a lack of effort. It was the imbalance created by accelerated closeness without stability. Understanding this pattern is not about hardening the heart. It is about strengthening discernment. Kindness does not need to disappear. It needs protection. Boundaries do not erase compassion. They preserve it. When you learn to pace your openness, you do not lose connection. You gain clarity. Healthy love appreciates kindness without consuming it. It does not rush to claim it. It does not test it. It allows it to exist freely. When someone respects your pace, your boundaries, and your independence, kindness remains a gift, not a liability. The most powerful realization for the kind and hopeful is this: you do not need to become less loving to be safe. You need to become more selective. Emotional generosity offered slowly becomes strength. Offered without pause, it becomes exposure. When you choose to protect your empathy, you ensure that it is given where it can truly grow. And in that choice, something shifts. You stop questioning your nature. You stop apologizing for your heart. You recognize that the problem was never your kindness. It was offering it to a dynamic that could not hold it responsibly. Awareness does not close the door to love. It simply teaches you when to open it. Choosing steady love over emotional fireworks. How peace becomes the new proof of connection. There comes a moment in emotional growth when excitement is no longer enough. When intensity, once mistaken for depth, begins to feel exhausting rather than inspiring. This moment is not a loss of passion. It is the awakening of discernment. Choosing steady love over emotional fireworks is not about settling. It is about understanding what truly sustains the heart. Fireworks are loud, bright, and brief. Steadiness is quiet, consistent, and enduring. One dazzles the senses, the other supports the soul. Emotional fireworks thrive on unpredictability. High highs followed by confusing lows create a cycle that keeps attention locked in. The nervous system becomes accustomed to stimulation, mistaking anxiety for anticipation. In such dynamics, calm feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. But peace is not emptiness, it is safety, and safety allows love to breathe instead of burn. Steady love does not announce itself dramatically. It shows up when it says it will. It listens without rushing to impress. It respects pauses, differences, and boundaries. There is no pressure to perform emotion or prove devotion. You are not pulled into constant reassurance or emotional management. Instead, you feel grounded, seen without being consumed, valued without being overwhelmed. One of the greatest shifts in choosing steadiness is redefining what attraction means. Attraction does not have to feel urgent to be real. It does not need chaos to feel alive. When attraction is rooted in respect, it deepens over time instead of demanding constant renewal. You do not fear losing it when you take space. You do not feel anxious when silence appears. Connection remains intact because it is built on trust, not stimulation. Many struggle with this shift because emotional fireworks create a false sense of meaning. Intensity convinces you that something important is happening simply because it feels powerful. But power without direction is unstable. Steady love may feel less dramatic at first, but it offers something far more valuable: reliability. And reliability builds confidence, not confusion. Choosing steady love also requires unlearning old associations. If chaos once felt familiar, peace can feel undeserved. You may question whether calm means boredom or lack of chemistry. But chemistry that requires constant emotional effort is not chemistry. It is endurance. True connection does not drain you, it restores you. In steady love, communication does not feel like negotiation. You are not afraid to express needs or concerns. Disagreement does not threaten the bond. You are allowed to be fully human, uncertain, imperfect, evolving. There is no emotional punishment for honesty, no withdrawal of warmth for independence. Love remains present, not conditional. This kind of connection strengthens identity rather than dissolving it. You do not lose yourself to maintain closeness. Your world expands instead of shrinking. You are supported in your growth, not subtly discouraged from it. Steady love does not compete with your life. It complements it. Choosing steadiness is also an act of courage. It means walking away from intensity that feels exciting but unstable. It means trusting that depth does not need drama to exist. It means allowing love to grow slowly, without rushing to define or secure it. This patience is not passive, it is powerful. Over time, something remarkable happens. Your nervous system recalibrates. You stop craving emotional spikes. You stop equating unpredictability with passion. You begin recognizing peace as presence, not absence. And in that recognition, you become less susceptible to emotional traps disguised as romance. Steady love teaches you that consistency is a language, that respect is a form of desire, that safety is not the opposite of excitement. It is the foundation that allows excitement to last. When love is steady, it does not need to convince you of its worth. You feel it in how you are treated, not how intensely you are pursued. In choosing steady love, you choose yourself. You choose clarity over confusion, depth over drama, truth over illusion. And once you experience a connection that does not rush you, pressure you, or test your worth, emotional fireworks lose their appeal. Because you realize that the strongest love does not explode into your life, it stays.